Good afternoon. Welcome back to another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. Today, we're going to be talking about getting big results, but with not a lot of gear. And for that, we welcome the man of the hour, JC Carey from Westcott. A huge thank you to them for hosting today's event. JC, what's going on, man?
Excited to be back. It's been a little bit, a brand new class. We've seen me do versions of From Fear to Flash in the past, and that's always exciting. And it's always great to be here with B&H and, with you.
It's always great to see you, man. It's always better in person.
I agree, because I crack your back.
Exactly. No one does it better. And I've missed a couple shows, so this is what I got for now. So I got to take it. But I'm going to remind everybody to get your questions in. JC will be having some Q&A at the end, and we're going to drop a link for those of you who have not seen From Fear to Flash. You can catch up on that. But JC, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Cool. I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. Sooner is better, right? So my name is JC. I'm here from Westcott, and we're going to do Pack Small, Shoot Big, which is a new class that I'm doing. It's going to be based really around how to get the best results with small strobes. And when I talk about small strobes, I'm going to be talking specifically today about some Westcott gear that we're going to get to in a second. But first, I'm just going to introduce myself and give you all of my information, because a lot of this information is a small part of the Westcott difference, is that there's actually people that work at Westcott that you can get in touch with when you have challenges or problems or you want to get things repaired. So there is my email. If you have any questions about this class, or if you want to just, hit me up about how something happened and you don't feel like you want to put the question in, hit me up. I will answer. There's my Instagram, my website, the Westcott site, and Westcott U. And I can't tell you guys enough that Westcott U's got a lot of really great stuff if you want to go take a look at that. So a little bit about me. I've been shooting mostly my whole life. And when I'm not shooting for money, or when I'm not teaching or working, what I like to do is shoot. Waking up early, staying up late, doing long exposures, short exposures, concert stuff. Abandoned buildings is one of my favorite things to do. I've been blessed to do a lot of great sports stuff over the last bunch of years. I've shot some of the best athletes in the world doing what they do best. And that stuff is a blast. It really is. It excites me. I know it sounds really cliche, but it does kind of feed my soul. But at the end of the day, what I like to do is lighting. It feeds the part of that needs to be in control where things aren't in control. And like many people, I have lighting anxiety. And what's lighting anxiety? Well, lighting anxiety is a common ailment. It affects a lot of passionate photographers. It forces them to give up on strobes. It forces them to give up on adding light to their pictures because they just don't like the results. They're scared of it. And instead they relegate themselves to looking for great available light. And the problem is that doesn't always exist. But like I said, I had that fear for a long time, which is why the other class is called From Fear to Flash. But, when I met the witch and she gave me the kid, I realized that there was nothing about lighting to be scared about. So fast forward, I spend the last bunch of years teaching myself how to do this and really failing, but eventually getting better. And I'm going to try to tell you guys about how to do that, but also about, I think that small strobes are less intimidating than big strobes, and let's go with that. So the things that I use in this class and that I carry pretty much all the time, and this is reality, I carry this gear. The FJX3, which is the trigger in the Westcott system. And what's amazing about it is that the M version is multi-brand, and it works on Canon, Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, Fujifilm. It'll actually work on other cameras. You're just not necessarily going to get high-speed sync or TTL. And now there's an S version as well. And the S version is Sony specific because they have a different hot shoe, and that's going to give you all that. You can use the M version on Sony, but you do need the accessory. There's an adapter that goes in between. Now, that right away is a pretty nifty feature, and it shares some of its DNA with the speedlight that we have, which is the FJ82. There are also two versions. There's that S version for the Sony shooters out there, and there's an M version for everybody else to use. It's still the first round head touchscreen speedlight with multi-brand camera compatibility. I know that's a big mouthful, but if you need a speed light that's going to give you a lot of power at a great price that is super easy to use because of that touchscreen, then the FJ82 is the one for you. The big brother that's about the same size when they're stretched out, but that offers a lot more power is the FJ200. And the FJ200 is the fastest 200 watt second battery powered strobe in the world, recycles at 1.3 seconds, which is half a second faster than its nearest competition. It also has some other benefits. It's got 450 full power flashes. That's great. Fits in your hands, about the same size as 70 to 200 f4 for those of you that are trying to figure this out without seeing one in my hand. But it is also consistent, and it's consistent at 5500 Kelvin, which is a big deal if you're going to use this as your main light. But it's even a bigger deal if you're going to try to combine lights. If you're going to use this as a hair light with an FJ400, let's say, or with an FJ80 or 82, trying to make those match without having to gel things, without having to have all that complication, the FJ200 is your light. So what's the Westcott difference? I kind of touched on all these bases, but here we go. Consistency, reliability, and customer service. Now, after this, we're going to just talk about lighting and why. I just don't want you guys to think that you're stuck here for 45 minutes of me talking about Westcott, although I could. Those things make a big difference. And just like I always tell people that they should buy from the places that support them, I think that you should buy brands that support you. There's some other brands out there that don't have customer service, that don't have anybody for you to call into, that don't offer you reliability or consistency. And that's tough. So like when you're buying, we all know that we live in a world where there's a lot of choices. Well, you're here. B&H is giving you content for free stuff. Buy from them. I'd like to say buy from us because we're here for you as well. And with that, let's move on. So this is a new class. It's the same question is always what I have to start with. Why add light? And the answer is pretty simple, because this and this don't equal this. Because this, which is just the available ambient light, is fine. And if I really worked it, maybe I could get something out of that. But by adding one speed light, it can be here. I can have a lot more control over that and get repeatability and shoot at faster shutter speeds. So I don't have to worry about them being soft because we're trying to, or by having too high of an ISO. Because the camera tells me this is correctly exposed. I'm a photographer, right? I think that this looks a lot better. There's a lot of choices in between, but I like the drama of that sky. I like the way New York City looks in the background better. So let's add a couple of lights and end up here. So small strobes, same answer. Creativity is the reason to add light. Creativity is the reason to add any light, whether it's a constant light or a strobe, a big strobe, a small strobe. There's really only one answer, which is creativity. If the ambient light bores you, add light. So let's jump in and talk a little bit more about lighting and about why we can use small lights and get a lot of what we're talking about done. When you first decide to pick up strobes, and I think for a lot of people, a small strobe is their first choice. It's going to be easier, probably something for you to pick up and not be so intimidated by as something big. The first 10,000 photos are going to be your worst. That's what we always say when we're talking about strobes. It's going to be the same problem when you start photography as when you do this. Don't let that bother you. Learn to revel in that failure, but also learn to fail forward. Now, this next piece of advice, I wish somebody had said it to me a lot sooner, or somebody had phrased it for me that way. It's a piece of advice that we probably all know already. Every lit image is two separate exposures. It's the stuff that we do with our cameras because we're already photographers. If you are taking the time to sit here and watch me, you're already a photographer. You pick apertures, you pick shutter speeds, you create an exposure. But a lot of times those exposures are going to leave you unsatisfied when you're trying to put a subject in the middle of that scene. And so by adding a light, we can do that simply, just one light. And that's a great tool to have in your toolbox. So learn to pre-visualize. Now, pre-visualization is this, it's a process where when you look at a scene, and you probably already do it, you look at a scene and you start thinking to yourself, what will this look like at various apertures, at various shutter speeds, various ISOs? And if you've been failing and reveling in it and failing forward, you're already there. And I get it that in this day and age where most of us have switched to mirrorless, pre-visualization maybe is become something that we can take a step back from because we're just going to switch it, but it's never going to let you see what it's going to look like with strobes. So you still have to have that kind of idea in your head that if I take these 3 or 4 steps, I can get from here to here. Seeing that sky, knowing, because, obviously I am shooting at a certain shutter speed that gave me the sky that way. I picked a certain aperture that gave me just enough depth of field, and then I add the lights. Details matter. And I'm not talking about the shoelaces. This is a cute picture, and I put it in there because it talks to me about this. What I mean is that just because we live in an era of AI and we live in an era of extensive post and we live in an era where film, real film still costs money, but, digital film does not, it doesn't mean that you should just bang away on your shutter and not pay attention. Take a second, breathe, step back. Look at the picture, decide, am I overexposed? Am I underexposed? Do I like the way the light is hitting my subject? Rather than trying to fix all that later, take a breath and do that. And that just leads to the next one, which is keep it simple. There's going to become times when you're trying to light something and it's not going to be working out. Just hold on, take a breath, don't do this, step back from that, and just go back to the basics. What are some of those basics? Even though the camera companies have all spent millions of dollars developing shutter priority and program and aperture value settings, when you decide to use flash, put your camera in manual. It's going to give you a ton more control. And that's what we're trying to get when we decide to add light. We are really doing our best to go from taking photos to making photos. In line with that is, whenever possible, get the light out of the shoe. You're going to get more dynamic, more realistic light. It's going to create shadows. It's going to create definition, or it's going to get rid of shadows and give you a more glamour. Those are all decisions you're going to have to make. So why small strobes? We make bigger lights. Currently the biggest one is the FJ400, but there's going to be bigger lights probably, right? We know that there's an infrastructure, that we're building, but small strobes still have a big, big place in my life. And that's, for the same reasons they have when I just shot speed lights. They're easy to pack. They're cost effective. The power to size ratio is amazing. To think that I can have a 200 watt light that fits in my bag and I can carry anywhere, something I wouldn't have thought of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that, I would have had to carry 2 or 3 speed lights to get that same amount of power. They're easy to mount and hard to get to places. I shot a concert, Saturday night. I was able to mount lights off stage around that. I couldn't do that with 400 watt lights. I couldn't do that with something bigger than that. It's really easy to be able to do that, which is a really great thing. And again, all of those things we just talked about, they lead to creativity, because it makes me think outside the box a little bit. Can I do things that I wouldn't do with my bigger strobes? So why not small strobes? What are the challenges? Well, there's only one, really, and that's less power. All right, there's less power, but photography and lighting is all problem solving. And if we know that that's our one downside, then we can move forward from that and really take advantage. So where do we start to overcome that challenge? Well, the first thing that I'm going to always think about is ISO. And when I say, why is ISO even more important to me when I'm shooting small strobes than big strobes? Because there's a little less power. But by raising my ISO, I get more power. By raising my ISO, I get a faster recycling time. So if I needed to recycle quicker, I can. it's going to give me more battery life. Like one of the downsides to small strobes is they do have smaller batteries, whether you're dealing with, double A's with some of the first party flashes or using our lithium polymer batteries, they are still smaller. So obviously they're not going to give you the same amount of power that a full size giant battery is going to give you. But every time that I raise the ISO one stop, I have given myself another stop out of my strobe. I have halved the recycling time. I have doubled my battery life. So knowing your camera and knowing where you feel comfortable with your ISO is going to mean that you can really, get a lot of extra power out of that small strobe. It's not always the answer. Sometimes, 100 or 64, whatever your base ISO is still going to be right. We're going to go to the next step, talk about that. But, there's times where like I'm shooting a concert again, where I want the flash to go off very quickly. I want to strain it a little bit, so raising the ISO a little bit means that I'm going to get more pops out of the flash at a faster recycling time and be able to make it work longer. Now, aperture. Anybody who's seen me teach before knows that I pick an aperture based on how much depth of field that I want. But it also, in my head, comes into play when I decide to use the smaller strobes. I know that I'm not going to push my FJ200 to shoot at f16 on a regular basis. It's not the tool that's designed for that. So when I decide to take out the smaller lights, I'm going to shoot based around that gear to maximize what I have with me. Because maybe I was hiking or I was going to a show or I was going to something else where I had to run and gun, and carrying those big strobes wasn't practical. So I'm going to have to kind of tailor my shooting style around that. I'm going to use generally some faster apertures. Faster apertures are going to maximize the power. I'm not asking it to overcome my aperture to get the power out. I hope that's making sense. These fast apertures, 1.4, 1.2, are going to mean that I've got all the light I need out of an FJ80 or an FJ200. That's not to say that we can't shoot other apertures. This is 2.8, plenty of light coming out of an FJ200. Again, high speed sync coming out of a small rapid box, no problem because I'm shooting 2.8, but that's not always the answer. Sometimes we're going to stop down, and that just means we're going to have to make other decisions. Again, another example of taking advantage of those fast apertures so that I get plenty of power. Now, there is a flip side to that. It's not just fast aperture fun. There are times where, like, this was a case where I saw that sun back there. I knew that if I stopped down a lot, I'd get that starburst, which I wanted. I had to take the shot a couple times to get it just right. The FJ200 is right on top of her. It's just out of the frame. And if you were able to zoom in on those catch lights, you'd see they're right pretty much in the middle. They're coming right at her just to get enough power to do that. This all ties into light placement is another way that we can overcome that lack of power. Now, where we put the light, and I don't just mean as far as if it's going to give me directional light, but the closer it is, it's stronger. That makes sense. Closer is softer, which a lot of times is good. Closer is not always better. You just have to remember that. I know that we're going to say close is going to give you a stronger light and closer is going to give you softer light. And if that helps you tell the story that you want to tell, put the light close and you're going to have no problems. If you look through a lot of the work that I have shared in this class, and if you haven't noticed yet, you will notice that a lot of my subjects are close to the edge. I'm definitely using rule of thirds. And that's because I have the light just out of the frame a lot of the time. Here's an example with that Octa-S. I didn't want to go super soft. So the Octa-S is a relatively small modifier in the grand scheme of things. It's going to give me softish light without giving me super soft light because it doesn't help this story. In this case, another rapid box, that I want that shadow around. It's going to give a little bit of definition to Skip's face at 2.8, 2500th. Again, Octa-S, plenty of soft light out of a small modifier, but sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes softer isn't better. This is a perfect example of that. If you've seen my work, you've seen this picture. This is at 2.8 at 1250th in a relatively sunny day, but really he's in a little bit of open shade, which means that my light's more powerful. I move it all the way back away from him because I want that hard light. So we have a section at the end of this, but I'm just going to, softness or hardness comes from the size of the light source in relation to the size of the subject. So if we take a speed light or an FJ200, which is a small light source to begin with, and we move it back, it's going to give you that real hard light, which is what I wanted in a picture like this. The next way to beat that challenge really is to pick your spots. Again, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily shoot f11 or f16 on a regular basis with my speed light, my FJ80 or my FJ200. I also know that there are certain times of the day that I'm going to either have to avoid just a little bit or use in together with closer, and all of that. But pick your spots. Time of day is your friend. If you can avoid middle of the day when the light's at the hardest and the brightest, well, then your FJ200 is going to give you plenty of power. I'll shoot that all day in the morning, all day at night, all day at dusk, and it's going to give me plenty of power. But if I try to take that out and put it far away from a subject at noon in the summertime, I might run into some challenges. So that's not great. Location is your ally. Being able to decide to find some open shade, let's say sometimes, because maybe you couldn't pick the time. Deciding to take your shot indoors, indoors, FJ200, FJ80 is all the power you need. If you can use all the rest of the things we're talking about, faster apertures, putting it close, all of these things in conjunction are the things that are going to help you make the best pictures possible with your small strobe. Just remember, one tool does not rule them all. We don't carve turkey with a Swiss Army knife. We're not going to pick one light and say, this is the only light that I'm ever going to need. Picking your spots, this was middle of the day, but I put my buddy there in open shade, plenty of light. Again, lots of shade, but I still needed to get faster because of all those constant lights. So I picked an aperture because I wanted the shallow depth of field. I wanted the lights in front and back to go out. 800th of a second controlled the ambient light that was there. And that meant that my FJ200, which is over to the right shooting through there, is the only light in this scene. And, it's given me a vibe that it could be at a totally different time than it was. It's middle of the day. There is some light outside there, but instead I'm able to control it and make the light the way I want it to be. We don't necessarily think of FJ200s for, studio work, because we're like, but if your style involves shooting faster apertures, maybe not as fast as 1.2, somebody handed me a 51.2 and you got to choose it at 1.2. And luckily my subject here is good for that. But this is 1.2 at 8,000th of a second inside. It's not something you would normally do in the studio, but it was more of a test, but it worked. And it's why the FJ200s were more than enough light to make this work. If you look into his eyes, you will see the two catch lights. So there's a beauty dish, camera right, FJ200, pretty close, giving us most of the light around the front of them. And then there's a 53-inch that is feathered to catch some of that background. As you can see, I didn't do it perfectly. There is a dark spot over his camera right shoulder, but it worked. I didn't get deep shadows, filled it, got a little bit of that red, which stood out against the blue and was able to make that happen. Now, when I'm outside, again, pick your spots. Time of day is your ally. Here's a case where I'm shooting 16 millimeter on a crop camera. So it's not really a fisheye or something that wide. It's about 24 in the real world. How much depth of field do I want? I wanted plenty. Turned out that was not the best choice because it turns out that I cannot handhold at a fifth of a second. But by having the speed light there as my main light close to my subject, I get really soft light on her face. And also that benefit of why they call it a speed light. A speed light is called a speed light because it has a really fast flash duration, which freezes the things that it hits. So having that light just out of frame, like I mentioned to you guys before, when I'm using a speed light, a lot of times you'll see like a really efficient use of the rule of thirds, where my subjects are close to the edges. A fifth of a second meant that the sky came in. It's almost dark at this point outside. It meant that the city lights show up. I get just a little bit of light on the pier, but you can see that it's shaky because I'm shooting at a fifth of a second. But my model's face and upper body is tack sharp. What's really nifty about this is because that light is hitting her face, but not hitting the dress that's flying in the background, we get that kind of ethereal, ephemeral. I'm using all my big words right now, I'm trying to impress you guys. But as she drops that down during that half a second, it's not getting frozen by the strobe, which means that it's being lit more by the sky, which has given us that kind of interesting look. Similar situation to that, where I'm really trying to drag out. I wouldn't shoot a portrait at a 40th of a second, if I didn't have to. But in this case, that 40th of a second is going to make sure that my subject is tack sharp anyway, because it's shooting such a fast flash duration. So this is depth of field. F4, at 37 millimeters in this case, I'm on a zoom, and I was not zoomed all the way out. So F4 gave me plenty of depth of field. His eyes are tack sharp, his hair's tack sharp. If you were able to zoom all the way in, maybe his shoulders aren't tack sharp at the back, but who cares? That 40th of a second is there to get the ambient light the way that I want. If I can get the ambient light good, then the rest of this now is adding the light and painting the light in just the way I want. This is a 2-light setup. I got the main FJ200 and Octa S. You can see it actually in the catch lights there. It's just over my shoulder. And to camera right, which is going to throw some of that shadows down on his face to create this. And then there's a bare FJ82 behind him for 2 reasons. It's going to light up that smoke. If you backlight the smoke, it's going to give you more feel. It also puts that little bit of light under his arm that he has, there, which separates that so it doesn't get lost into the background. Another one of these freezing action using the strobe. 46 millimeters, 2.8, plenty of depth of field. I don't want the cart or the truck. The truck kind of pulled in and ruined the shot a little bit. But anybody who's been to New York or maybe any big city knows it's a hot dog cart. The idea is there. So I don't need all that depth of field. 1/25th of a second meant that the ambient lights of the city show up in this picture. But she's not lit by that. She's going to be lit by an FJ200, Octa S. I have a paint pole adapter. We're using that just to light her up. Camera left a little bit, get a little bit of that shadow, get a little bit of that mystery. What I love about this picture is that her scarf on camera right side, you see all that blur because that's not hit by the strobe. It's kind of interesting. It gives this idea that there's some motion, even though her face is tack sharp. And one of the reasons I love to carry my small strobes everywhere is you just never know when you're going to need them or when the time's going to come to try to get a little creative. My daughter loves jellyfish. Anybody who's seen jellyfish at the aquarium knows they are in a really, really dark room usually. So in this case, Zoe goes behind it, puts the FJ80 at the back of the tank. I go F4 for the depth of field that I want, 20 millimeters. F4 is a good amount of depth of field because I'm pretty close. 2,000th of a second kills almost all the ambient light in the room because I don't want it to be part of it, and then pop the strobe in. Now, where am I on time? We're doing good. Excellent, guys. So here's some tips, a little bit of tips for getting the most out of your small strobes. Remember, softer is bigger, closer, but you don't want a hot spot. So choose your modifiers wisely. I have an adapter that I can put any Bowens mount onto my FJ200. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to do that. Same, my FJ80s can go into anything that we make, Octa Ls, 7-foot umbrella, whatever, but it doesn't always make sense to pick such a big modifier when you're using a smaller strobe. If you do that, you're going to oftentimes get a little bit of a hot spot in the middle of it. If you're doing that for effect and you like a natural fall off, then that's great. But I've seen people do it where they're frustrated that they're getting fall off, and it's because they chose a modifier that really wasn't suited to their light. Small soft boxes like the Octa S, the 1x3 Rapid Box, the Joel Grimes Beauty Dish are all perfect with the 200 or the 80. I'm not trying to scare you away from using modifiers. I'm saying pick the ones that make sense. If I need to do a full body head to toe, and I'm going to get out my 1x4 strip or something even bigger, I'm going to my FJ400. It has a bigger light dome, a bigger bulb. It is going to fill that a lot more efficiently. and it's going to light them all the way. If I try to put my FJ200 in that, because it has a smaller head, I'm going to get a little bit more fall off at the top and the bottom, let's say. Same if I choose to use an FJ80. No matter how much I change the amount of light, there's still going to be fall off because of the size of that light source. If you need a bigger mod, consider the bounce style. By that, I mean ones that go backwards, fill the modifier, and then go forward, whether that's an umbrella or something like the Apollo line of softboxes. The orb was definitely my gateway drug. I've been using an orb for going on 20 years now, and that's a lot longer than I've worked at Westcott. I've only been at Westcott for the last 3 years. I was using a lot of Westcott products before. The orb's a 43-inch softbox. Now, I need to put it relatively close if I only put like an FJ80 into it, because it's a big modifier. But because the light goes backwards, hits the back, and then comes back around, it fills that whole box and gives you like really beautiful light with no hotspot. Cater your shooting style to your gear. I know I kind of said this already, but just remember, soft isn't always best. There's going to come a time where that portrait shooter that I listen to a million people talk about soft light, voice is going to be on your shoulder saying, you got to, go soft, you got to go soft, you got to go soft. But if I'd have went soft for, let's say, that picture of the gentleman at the Great Wall of China, I would have lost all the shadows in his face. I would have lost all the character. I would have lost all the detail. Think about what you're shooting. Make sure that you cater your shooting style to the gear sometimes. Like I said, if you pick your spots and you decide to move really close, you can do 90% of what you're ever going to want to do with an FJ200 or an FJ80. But don't try to make it do that 10% that you couldn't do. You're just trying to force a square hole round peg. You know how that saying goes better than I do. Pocket boxes, diffusion domes, bounce cards, even walls are your friends. Less power is the number one. Strictly speaking, there's another little bit downside too, which it is a smaller light source. So if you don't modify that at all, you're going to get harder light, which, as we said above, sometimes is good. But it can be as simple as putting a pocket box on, a diffusion dome, a bounce card, hitting a wall first. If you've got a nice white wall and you can put it close to your subject, or a nice ceiling, you can get really soft light out of one of these just by bouncing the other way. Grip gear is your friend. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to show a little slide in a second that's going to talk about what I mean with that. But one of the things that has really made it so I can be more creative is by having a lot of grip gear, like little doodads, gadgets that allow me to mount these lights in lots of different places. So when I talk about that, what am I talking about? Well, let's go through these a little bit. We'll start in the upper left, actually. So Octa S is a softbox with 8 sides, an Octa. Underneath that, if you look, is a beauty dish. Our beauty dish is rounder. It has 16 panels. They're the same size. They're both 26 inches. The beauty dish comes with the deflector plate that goes inside that gives you a much, I'm not going to say a better quality of light, a different quality of light. Those are both, though, going to give you a certain amount of softness because they're a certain size in relation to the subject. The strip there, that 1x3, gives us a nice rim light, a nice edge light. I use that sometimes for headshots in a triangle if I'm trying to do, like our friend Peter Hurley does. If I'm trying to get that look, but with my small strobes, I could do something similar. Now, how do I mount those so that I can use those with an FJ200? Like I said, grip gear is your friend. On that lower left, if I'm going to use just FJ80s, I got that nice round head, and this works for any round head out there because we have switched softboxes. I can use that little adapter. I'm going to use an FJ80 with that. I'm going to be able to put a full-size softbox on there, which is really a great thing to be able to do. On the right of that, you're going to see our quick mount. Quick mount lets you take an FJ80 or an FJ200 and put them into any Bowens mount softbox, which is a really good option to have. You can use the switches with the FJ200 insert, which is sold separate, but it's like $19, and you're going to be able to put any of these softboxes straight under your FJ200. Now, other gear that I have in my bag all the time, like no matter what, because they're all small, that bottom one there with the blue, that cool blue color, it's mounting hardware that Westcott makes that comes with a small little ball head. It comes with a 1/4 20 and 16 by 20 is the one that I worry about. 5/8 is the other one. Comes with a lot of options, and it can fit around pipes, around branches, around. I've done it to rope on occasion where like I need to hide a light, up or out of the frame. Gives you a ton of options, and it's a really small package that fits into your bag. That's in my bag all the time. Above that's an umbrella bracket. An umbrella bracket's going to let you use a speed light with something like the orb, which is on the right there. You see that a speed light, an old style speed light, mounted inside, bouncing backwards into it, and then it's going to come forward. There's going to be diffusion on the front of that when you use it. It also comes with a grid, which is nice. What's cool about the FJ80s and FJ200s is they have 1/4-20 holes on them. So I can take off the cold shoe that's there, screw my light straight into that and have it on the same axis closer to the center, which is going to give you an even better light. That M6 plate that you see above that looks kind of like a hot shoe quick release plate, but with a little doodad on top of it, that's going to let you take any Arca Swiss tripod and make it into a light stand. You might not always carry a light stand. I don't expect you to. But you probably have a tripod with you. And if there's a situation where you want to shoot lights and you need it to be off camera, because as I mentioned earlier, that's going to give you better quality of light. Well, this is a piece that, it's a very inexpensive piece that you can have in your bag all the time. And it's going to make it so that you can get that flash off camera anytime. That shorty arm that's in there, that's going to be able to make it so that your strip boxes, your umbrellas, your Apollos are going to be able to tilt more because they get the light and the umbrella bracket away from the light stand. So you're going to be able to get full tilt. That's a great option. Upper right is the pocket box. Like I said, sometimes it's just as simple as not letting the direct light hit straight onto your subject, just spreading it out, making it a little bit wider, which makes it a little bit bigger in relation to your subject, makes it better. The creative pack that you see up top there, that's the roundhead creative pack, the FJ80 one. That comes with grids, gels, barn doors, a bounce card, a snoot. This little tiny box comes with so much flexibility to give you a lot of options to get different looks out of your FJ80 or any roundhead light that's out there. Then you see the diffusion dome. That's a piece that has proved invaluable to me on numerous occasions where the light looked good. Remember when I said details matter? The light looked good coming straight off the flash. But when I put this on, it's magnetic. It just snaps right on real quick. The light looks so much better. And sometimes that's what we're talking about. It's a game of like, does it look good? Does it look better? And sometimes just getting better is all we need. This is one of those situations where, I'm on a trip, I'm outside, Zoe's mom's there, and I'm trying to make a decent picture on vacation, and all I've got is a speed light with me. All right. So I go through that same process that we talked about. I'm picking an aperture. 2.8 gives me enough depth of field with a wide angle lens. Getting a little bit lower makes her legs look a little bit longer, just a little bit of a posing tip there for you, or a shooting tip on how to get that. Good depth of field. The wood looks in focus. The building is in focus enough. She's in focus. Then I go to a shutter speed. Remember, these are both options. These are things. My process works in a way that it's the same things I would do if I wasn't lighting this. If I wasn't lighting this, I'd still go, how much depth of field do I want? Then I would pick a shutter speed. The downside is if I was shooting without a light in this situation, I would have to pick a shutter speed that left my subject lit, which would mean the building would be blown out. I'd lose all the detail in that sky, that dynamic sky. So instead, I was able to pick a shutter speed solely based on what looked good to me, ignoring my subject for a second, because now I'm going to add light. Because remember, every lit picture, it's 2 separate exposures. At that pace, I add the light. I don't have room to get a big modifier in there. I didn't have a big modifier anyway. I have a speed light. I don't have the modifier. So I put it as close as I can, because the closer it is, the softer it is. So I've been talking about my process. I've been talking a lot about small lights. And if you've seen me, you can kind of ignore this a little bit, but I think it's always good to hear it again. The process doesn't change whether I'm using my 400s, whether I'm using my L60B constant lights, whether I'm using my FJ80s or my FJ200s. My process stays the same. So I convinced you to get some small strobes. I convinced you that you don't have to be scared of lighting. So now what do? I ordered it. B&H sent it to me the next day. They're awesome. They got it to me for free shipping. Awesome. They had it in stock. What do? I open up the box, and all of a sudden my light anxiety creeps in. Here's the simple version. Like we said, there's a link in there to go look at From Fear to Flash, which I was recorded on the YouTube for this, but I'm going to give you the quick version anyway. Pick an aperture for depth of field. Just remember that if you decide to pick f11 or f16 because you want a lot of depth of field, even f8, you're asking for a lot of light out of your small strobe. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's going to have to be in conjunction with changing your ISO, perhaps putting the light really close to the subject, deciding to do this in an area where you have open shade or where you can make other decisions that amplify the power of your light. So pick an aperture for depth of field. That's a creative choice. Then pick a shutter speed that controls the ambient light. This is the same process if you were shooting a picture any day. I'm looking outside right now. I say that at 2.8, to get the sky the way I want it, to get the trees to a rich green, to get the field or whatever, I'm going to put it at 2,000th of a second. If I'm inside and I'm like shooting in, a wedding, let's say, and I want the idea of the dance floor, but I don't want the dance floor to be overly bright, then maybe it's 2.8 at, an 80th of a second or a 1/125th of a second. It depends on how brightly lit the dance floor is. Regardless, I'm going to pick a shutter speed that gives me the ambient light that I want. We haven't even worried about flash yet, because that after I do those first two things, I can add the light. And adding the light sounds really, either intimidating or just, duh, add the light at the end after that. But there's other things you need to think of. And so in the simple version, we got to say, how much do we need? Just a little bit of light or a lot of light? Where do we want that light to come from? Where the light comes from is going to help decide whether we get shadows or not. It's going to determine, it's going to go a little bit of the way in determining how people that see the picture afterwards perceive our subject. If I throw a lot of shadow because I make the light very directional, the person's going to look off, not forgive the pun, but a little shady, right? They're going to have a lot of shadows, which is going to make them look more defined for sure, which for some people like myself helps. It's going to make me look thinner if I get more shadows. But if I make somebody look too shadowy, well, then they look shadowy. If I put the light coming from the side, like this is a good example for me where he looks approachable and happy and smiling. Obviously, he's giving you that look. But if I move that light even more to camera left, he starts to look like maybe he's laughing maniacally instead of laughing happily. How hard or soft do you want it? And, that really is, do I put it really close where even though it might be a small light source, it's going to be big in relation to my subject, which is going to give softer light? Or do I take it and move it back so that I can get some more defined shadows, which are going to create some drama, some depth? When we're talking about this, like these are those things that we're worrying about. How much, direction, how hard? I worry about color a little bit. It's not something that I do a ton of. Like I do it a little bit, and I'm getting more and more comfortable with it every day. But these are in order of how I worry. Amount. If it was just amount that I was worried about, we have ISO, we have fast apertures. Amount isn't a biggie to me. Don't worry about that much. Direction and hardness, those two in the middle, those are the two that I am constantly in my mind saying, is this the way I want it to look? I'm going back to that details matter. I'm also going back to keep it simple. If I take the light and I move it hard to camera right, like I have with the fireman, I'm going to throw shadows. I have this on the other side of the fence to throw those shadows. But now I do have a second light in this scene to fill in a little bit because I don't want him to look mean. He's a fireman. He should look approachable and happy. But I was trying to use color. I gelled the main light to get that warm glow. It could be coming from a fire. It could be coming from sunset. It could just be the lights of his fire engine, whatever. And then another color on the other side, just to be a little bit creative. but that directional light is going to give me a little bit of a sense of depth. That's important. How hard the light is. How hard is going to, like you see here, Nick's a sweetheart. In this picture, he looks like he could be a bad guy because I got that light really hard. It's relatively far back from him, which means that the transition from what's lit to what's shadowy is fast. It's dramatic. It stops hard. Like you would never use this picture on your dating profile. You know, you just don't look like somebody that's approachable. A picture on the right where I'm talking about color, there's a few ways to look at this. I could gel the light and create color on my subject or on a wall. Or in this case, what I've done is I've put a warm orange gel on the light and put it just over her shoulder. That's not the sun back there. I've created the sun by making a color choice using gels. I could do this also by changing the white balance of my camera to do this. Now, if you change the white balance, but you don't want your subject to look that color, then you're going to use a gel that's an opposite. We could do a whole class on gels maybe in the future, you know, but there's other people that do a lot of great gel stuff out there. Definitely look it up if that's something that really excites you. But you do now have that choice by using gels to not have your light always be 5500 like it is on our lights, but to make it something that's a little more dramatic, whether it's creative like with the firefighter, or I'm striving for a look that could be natural like I'm doing with this picture on the right. So I am going to leave it like that. We're going to go back to questions and see if there are any. It doesn't look like there are now, but if you have any questions, get them in. I'm going to chat with the staff a little bit, you know, here with our friendly neighborhood B&H group, which is just like some of the best people out there. And I want to say thank you guys. If you have questions, you have my email. You can get in touch with me on Instagram, on my email, and I will answer you and I'll give you whatever knowledge I have. I want to say thanks. I'm going to stop the share. Maybe if I do that, there we go. All right, stop the share. Hey.
And we're back.
I didn't put you to sleep. I thought I was going to come back and you're going to be knocked out.
No, come on. You already know I'm a Westcott shooter, so
I know I
gotta pay attention. How else am I gonna stay up on all the products? Because there's, you know how the internet is. There's so much information out there. There's too much information out there. So we need people like you to cut through all the fat and tell me exactly what I need to know and what I don't need to worry about.
Hopefully that was a fat cutting kind of class.
It was. I learned about some new modifiers and accessories there that I didn't know about before. So
that's excellent.
I got something out of it. I hope everybody else out there got something about it. I have a question for you, JC. If you had to choose only one,
yep,
FJ80 or a 200, and you needed versatility, but you also needed the full range of whatever you wanted to do. Which one?
So it's similar to I get that question both from FJ80 to FJ200 and from FJ200 to FJ400. You know, so and it's the same answer. It's a little easier with the FJ80 to FJ200. If I'm ever going to put the flash on the shoe, well, then the FJ80 is the answer, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as I mentioned, whenever possible, I don't put it there. You know, I shot a concert, you know, Saturday night where they let me use strobe because it's, you know, punk rock and everybody's jumping on my head. And I'm in the pit. I have my trigger and my shoe. I have the flash off so I can move it around because even that's going to give me more depth, more control where the light goes. But if you're somebody that just in your heart knows that you're going to put the light on the shoe sometimes, then the FJ80 is an easy choice. It's the most powerful speed light that's out there, recycles fast. That round head really does give you a more pleasing catch light, a more pleasing quality of light, even when it's straight on. It's not my ideal situation, but you know, if I'm shooting a wedding, sometimes there's one there. You know, it's just the way it is because it's just, that's life. Barring that, then the FJ200 all day. It's going to give me 3 times as much power. It can take more modifiers. It has, you know, a faster recycling speed. It has a longer lasting. Well, the new FJ82 actually has a battery life that really is close. When you were comparing the old FJ80 to this one, you got more out of the 200. But you have to take into account that I can go down 2.5, 3 stops on my FJ200 and have just as much power as an FJ80, which means the battery lasts infinitely more time if the FJ80 was even an option, you know, if that makes sense. And the recycling speed got 6 times as fast, everything about it. When I put an FJ200 into my bag, the way that I store my FJ80s is not bent like this. It's long ways like this. You put them 2 side by side, they're essentially the same. So it really gets a lot easier to make that choice. I think that as a dog lover and as a Staffordshire pit bull lover, because they pack a giant dog personality into a small dog, that's how I feel about my FJ200s. It's given me a ton of punch, and I can do everything with an FJ200 that I could do with an FJ80, but not necessarily the reverse. Except put it in the shoe. And that's a big except. Like I said, if I'm going to do that, and on price, they're so close that it makes that decision easy if you're mostly going to shoot off camera. And like I said, that's the same argument, same discussion I get into with people when they want to know, do I use FJ400s or FJ200s? And it comes down to really, I can do everything with an FJ400 that I can do with an FJ200, but I'd say it's about 10% of the time I need the extra watts. I need that extra stop. Otherwise, I'm happy with my 2s because I can carry 2 or 3 of them in my bag. Great. I probably droned on too long, but I was looking at the clock and I needed to fill some space.
No, that's good. I wish I would have asked you that before I purchased.
Well,
of course, I went out and look, I'm completely happy with my 400s. I love them.
Yeah.
But then when the 200 came out, it was like,
if they'd have all come out at the same time, somebody like you who's been with us for a while, it would have been a different discussion.
Oh yeah.
But, the 400 was by itself for a while, and when it was like, well, this is a great light at a great size at a great price that's consistent and has great customer service. Do you like how I worked that whole in? Cool. But the FJ200 makes that decision is the harder decision. Okay. When I'm in person and I'm talking to people, this is always something that comes up, and it's like, well, are you somebody that likes shooting fast apertures? Well, do you like shooting, do you feel like you have to shoot at noon? Well, if the answers are yes and no, well, then the 200 is an easy decision for me. Mm-hmm. But there's going to come times where the 400 is more usable in certain situations. Like I want to shoot it at 8, or I want to shoot in the middle of the day, or I want to shoot, with a longer battery life because I turned down that power by 1 stop and I've doubled my power life. It's always the same. So
I'll grab my 400s more than I'll grab the 80s.
Me too. And it's not because I hate my 80s. It's because I'm going to run into that situation where it's just not quite enough power. And it has nothing. Like, trust me. I mean,
it's fully capable, but it's just a matter of what kind of.
It does a ton. It's like I feel like I'm in that situation where I'm if I have to choose between I'm trying to make a good comparison here, a Passat or a GTI. The GTI is awesome, and it does all this stuff great, and then it fits into smaller spaces. It doesn't mean that sometimes I don't need more room. Like I don't need a minivan instead of my and that's where we're at with that. But it really comes, like I said, I hate when I do that. Like I said, but I don't carve the turkey with a Swiss Army knife. Sometimes you just need different tools for for different jobs. And this is that case where I want to make sure that I think there are some people that just are like, I just need big lights. I just need big lights. And I think that keeps people sometimes from doing it because they see everybody using big lights and they're like intimidated by that. So they know they're not going to carry it with them. They know that they're not going to bring it outside. They know that, and they're just like, well, I'm just going to shoot available light. Where I have, an FJ200 in the top of my camera backpack all the time because I just never know. It might turn into a situation where I just see the most awesome person in the world, and I walk up and I'm like, listen, man, I got to do a portrait. And having that with me is going to, I don't have to wait for great light. I can make great light.
Exactly. And I think it's when you have just a big option for lighting. It's like you said, you're not going to bring it everywhere. It's better to have something on you, anything, even if it's not ideally what you would want. It's the ability to create and to not be stuck with whatever light you've been granted by your surroundings.
I tell that whole lemonade story at the end of From Fear to Flash, where I met Stacy from America's Next Top Model at Christ the Redeemer at the Olympics. And, if I didn't have a speed light with me, I don't make this picture that makes her happy, that turns to me doing her wedding and her maternity pictures and all the rest of this stuff. And that's all because I had a light with me. And I'm a big believer that if you're not carrying your camera, you're just another person standing around staring at stuff. If you don't have your light, you're leaving like a lot of good pictures on the table because you decided just to go with like what's available. To me, a speed light or an FJ200 is always available. That's available light to me.
Perfect. Well, JC, it's always good having you on. You always bring the experience and the wisdom.
Super appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you guys, and of course, thank the entire team at Westcott for hosting today's event. We are going to be trying to get JC in person this summer. So if you're in the tri-state area, keep an eye out for those. Definitely. Well, JC, good to see you. I hope to see you on the show floor sometime within the next couple of months. We'll see if we can make that happen.
I'll be on the show floor this week. If you want to come by and say hi. I think I'm going to be in there on Wednesday or Thursday. We're trying to clear it up with some of the guys in the store, and then I think we're going to start running some in-store lighting demos, come in and shoot. So be on the lookout for that as well. Definitely something exciting.
Awesome. Well, you guys know where to find him. And if you don't, check in with us and we'll put you down with him.
Please.
So
you can get my phone number out. Do whatever you got to do. All right.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you so much, JC. A huge thank you again to all of our audience tuning in from all over the internet. If you guys have not checked us out on YouTube, just go on YouTube, type in B&H Event Space. We are streaming live there, and we'll be archiving our content there as well. That's all. That's all we got in the books for now. Another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.